Picture this. You're standing in the bustling heart of ancient Rome. The year is 38 AD, and the sun sets over the marble pillars of the imperial palace. Torchlight flickers, casting shadows that dance across mosaics depicting Rome's greatest triumphs. You breathe air thick with incense, perfumes from distant lands mingling with the earthy aroma of olive oil and sweat. Around you, courtiers whisper anxiously behind bejeweled hands, glancing toward the palace entrance, their faces pale with dread and fascination. Today, the most powerful man in the known world, Emperor Caligula, is about to commit an act so shocking, so profoundly taboo, that even Rome's hardened nobility struggles to comprehend it. You hear distant drums begin to throb rhythmically, echoing across the forum, signalling the start of the ceremony. The crowd parts instinctively, and a hush falls like a shroud. Caligula emerges, dressed not as emperor, but as a god. His dark eyes glitter dangerously beneath a golden crown. Beside him stands Agrippina, his own sister, robed in silk so thin it shimmers in the torchlight, the faint outline of her trembling shoulders visible beneath the fabric. Caligula's hand grips hers tightly, a possessive gesture that sends chills down your spine. The atmosphere grows heavier, like the air before a violent storm, and you notice senators shifting uncomfortably, priests silently mouthing prayers, mothers shielding their children's eyes. This isn't just another decadent Roman spectacle. This is a declaration of defiance against Rome's most sacred traditions, against the very gods themselves. You watch as Caligula lifts Agrippina's veil, leaning forward to kiss lips that mirror his own lineage. A collective gasp ripples through the crowd. What you're witnessing isn't merely scandal. It's the terrifying depth to which absolute power can drive the human soul. Imagine growing up in the shadow of Rome's cruelest emperor, living every day uncertain if it might be your last. This was the childhood of the boy who would become Caligula, born Gaius Julius Caesar Germanicus, into a family drenched in imperial blood and relentless tragedy. From his earliest days, Caligula learned that survival depended on navigating the dangerous waters of Roman politics. His father, Germanicus, a beloved military hero, died suspiciously when Caligula was just 7 years old. Rumours whispered poison, betrayal, and murder, staining his family's legacy with paranoia and grief. After his father's mysterious death, Caligula lived under the watchful, hostile gaze of Emperor Tiberius, a ruler infamous for cruelty. At only 18, Caligula was summoned to the isolated island of Capri, Tiberius's private retreat filled with whispered horrors. There, among shadowed halls and sunlit terraces overlooking the Mediterranean, he learned to mask his thoughts, smile when threatened, and praise the very man suspected of killing his father. Witnessing torture and execution firsthand became routine, stripping away his innocence and leaving deep scars on his psyche. When Tiberius finally died in 37 AD, Rome greeted the news with jubilation. Citizens filled the streets, celebrating the end of tyranny. They embraced young Caligula, convinced he represented a brighter future, unaware of the darkness hiding beneath his charming facade. At just 24, he ascended to power, showered with adoration from senators and commoners alike, who hoped he'd restore justice and dignity to Rome. In the early months, Caligula delivered exactly what Romans desired. He abolished oppressive taxes, staged grand spectacles, and charmed senators with promises of cooperation. Public love for him blossomed, cheering crowds greeting his every appearance. But beneath his gracious smile lingered the shadow of Capri, the memories of betrayal, and the secret certainty that trust was a fatal weakness. Slowly, as days turned to months, cracks appeared. His generosity became reckless extravagance, his charisma twisted into arrogance, and his humour turned dark and threatening. Paranoia, inherited from years of fearing assassination, consumed him. The young Emperor Romans once cheered gradually transformed into a tyrant they soon would fear. This was the man Rome had embraced, unaware that beneath the radiant youth lay years of trauma and a growing madness. Caligula's rise was more than political ascent. It was the beginning of Rome's descent into a nightmare they had celebrated too soon. You see her first in the palace courtyard, where sunlight glints off polished marble and the scent of crushed roses fills the air. Agrippina the Younger, daughter of Germanicus and Agrippina the Elder, walks with a calm grace that commands attention. She's still a teenager, but already the whispers follow her. Whispers of her striking beauty, her intellect sharper than most senators, and a gaze that seems to see straight through armour and ambition. She was born into a family adored by the people but haunted by tragedy. Her father died under mysterious circumstances when she was barely old enough to remember him. Her mother, bold and defiant, clashed openly with Emperor Tiberius and paid for it with exile and starvation. One by one, her brothers fell, executed or driven to suicide. Only she and her youngest brother Caligula survived the purge. They grew up as orphans in a court that felt more like a prison. On the island of Capri, under Tiberius's suspicious eyes, they learned early how to perform loyalty and hide their thoughts. Agrippina did not survive by luck. She learned to read faces, to mirror power, and to remain silent until it was her time to speak. Caligula watched her become a master of restraint, and he admired her not only as a sister, but as a symbol of the family legacy he believed only they could protect. She was tall, with high cheekbones and eyes that glowed with intelligence. Her words, when she chose to speak them, were careful and measured. She dressed with precision, not for fashion, but for effect. Everything about her suggested poise, but those who knew her well recognized the steel behind her composure. Agrippina was not just a sister. She was a mirror, reflecting Caligula's past, his ambition, and his isolation. Of all his surviving siblings, it was she who understood him best. She had suffered the same losses, seen the same blood spill, and learned to wear the same masks. And that familiarity, that shared fire, would become both their bond and their curse. At first, it seemed like an illness. Just months after Caligula became emperor, he fell gravely sick. Fever burned through him, and the palace held its breath, fearing the young ruler would die before his reign had truly begun. When he recovered, Rome rejoiced, but something had changed. The man who rose from that sickbed was not the one who had stepped onto the throne. His smile was colder now. His eyes lingered too long. His laughter came at strange moments and didn't always match the joke. He began to speak of himself not as a man, but as a god. He ordered temples to be built in his honour, demanded sacrifices, and insisted on being addressed as Jupiter incarnate. He dressed in gold-leafed robes and appeared in public dressed as Venus, Apollo, even Mercury. Senators were made to run beside his chariot like slaves. Soldiers were forced to collect seashells as trophies from a fake conquest. He declared over Neptune, the god of the sea. What began as eccentricity hardened into cruelty. Caligula's cruelty was not random. It was deliberate, theatrical. He liked to test loyalty by inventing impossible demands. He would invite noblemen to dinner, laugh with them, toast their health, and have them executed the next morning. He told one man he would slit his throat simply because it would be an improvement to his face. Others vanished without explanation. Their names were erased from records, their homes confiscated, their families ruined. He emptied the treasury within months, then turned to theft and extortion. He auctioned off palace furniture, seized estates, and demanded impossible taxes. He humiliated senators, forced priests to declare him divine, and made even hardened military men tremble in his presence. His personal life became darker, stranger. He took multiple lovers publicly, including the wives of his allies. He brought them to banquets, then dismissed their husbands and slept with them in adjoining rooms. These weren't private affairs. They were performances meant to degrade, and always his sisters were nearby. He paraded them through Rome in litters, dressed as goddesses, seated beside him at games, banquets, and religious rites. He called them his equals, then his wives. Among them, Agrippina drew the most attention. The stares they shared in public, the way he touched her arm, brushed her hair from her face. It crossed a line everyone saw but no one dared name. The emperor was no longer merely dangerous, he was unstable, unpredictable, and increasingly untouchable. The rumours started quietly, in the corners of palaces and behind the cloaks of courtiers. Caligula was too close to his sisters, they said. His affection lingered too long. His gaze held something it shouldn't. The whispers turned to murmurs, the murmurs to stunned silence, as the emperor stopped trying to hide it. What had once been a disturbing suggestion became an undeniable spectacle. He moved Agrippina and their sister Drusilla into the imperial palace, giving them rooms beside his own. He granted them titles reserved for empresses, placed their names on coins, and allowed them to sit beside him at ceremonies usually reserved for military generals or consuls. They entered public events dressed not as noblewomen, but as goddesses, cloaked in silk and gold, crowned with laurels, faces powdered and veiled. At festivals, Caligula would walk hand in hand with them, his grip firm, his smile thin. Drusilla, the eldest sister, became the centerpiece of his obsession. He declared her the apple of his eye, gave her honours no other woman had received, and began referring to her in imperial decrees. Roman law forbade a brother from marrying his sister. But Caligula was the law now, and he ignored what Rome had held sacred for centuries. According to sources close to the palace, he called her his wife in private. And when she died suddenly, possibly from illness, possibly not, he mourned her like a man who had lost more than blood. He shut down the courts, cancelled public games, and declared her a goddess, placing her among the stars as Diva Drusilla. It didn't end there. With Drusilla gone, his attention shifted more fully to Agrippina. The closeness they once shared as children turned into something darker. At banquets, he would have her sit in his lap, feed him by hand, kiss his cheeks slowly as if sealing some unspoken pact. Guests would pretend not to see, eyes cast downward, but no one could ignore the tension in the room. Ancient writers, Seneca, Suetonius, Cassius Dio, all agreed something unnatural was happening. The court knew, the Senate knew. The people, watching their emperor walk side by side with his sister, cloaked in the robes of a goddess, knew. But who would confront a man who had declared himself a god? Agrippina never spoke of it, at least not publicly. She endured. She smiled. She stood at his side, knowing what it meant to refuse the most powerful man in the world. It happened without warning, without law, and without precedent. One morning, the forum buzzed with a rumour no one dared repeat out loud. By nightfall, the rumour had become truth. Emperor Caligula was to marry his sister. The imperial court transformed overnight. Workers hung garlands from the marble columns of the Palatine Hill. Musicians were summoned, priests rehearsed ancient rites, senators received invitations printed with golden ink, sealed with the emperor's own crest. No explanation, no denial, just a command: attend. On the day of the wedding, Rome held its breath. You stand with the others inside the grand hall of the palace, lit by hundreds of oil lamps suspended from bronze hooks. The air is thick with perfume, sweat, and unspoken horror. The guests speak in quiet tones, shifting their weight as if trying to convince themselves this is a dream. But it is not a dream. It is Rome's most sacred halls turned into a stage for something unspeakable. Caligula enters first, dressed not in a toga, but in the shimmering robes of Jupiter, the king of the gods. He wears a laurel crown and sandals studded with emeralds. At his side, Agrippina follows, barefoot, head lowered, face hidden behind a sheer gold veil. Her dress clings to her frame, chosen to please him, not to protect her. The ceremony is unlike anything Rome has seen. Priests chant verses meant for union between nobles, not siblings. Caligula lifts her veil with trembling fingers and kisses her as though she is his equal. Some senators turn away, others force smiles. One man faints, another laughs, too loudly, too long, and is escorted out by guards who do not smile. The couple offers a toast of imported wine poured from amphorae carved with scenes of Venus and Mars. There is applause, weak and scattered. No one knows the protocol. There is no law for this. Outside, the city waits in silence. No cheering crowds, no festival drums, only torches burning through the night. Inside the palace, Caligula raises his cup and calls Agrippina not his sister but his wife. What you witness isn't a union, it's a warning. That Rome's gods have been replaced by something far more dangerous, an emperor who has unchained himself from all limits, and a sister who now wears the crown that once only queens could bear. Every morning the palace comes alive with movement. Servants rush through marble corridors, slaves polish golden statues, guards line the entrances like statues with beating hearts. But in one wing of the palace there is only silence. Behind heavy curtains and locked doors, Agrippina wakes not as a sister, not even as a queen, but as the wife of her own brother. Her world is narrow, gilded and suffocating. She eats from silver dishes, wears gowns stitched with thread from the east, sleeps in sheets perfumed with rose oil. But none of it belongs to her. It's all his choices, his gifts, his control. Even her smile must be measured, her gaze carefully weighed. A single misstep could turn favour into punishment. Caligula watches her constantly. In public, he parades her as divine. At religious festivals, she stands beside him as a living goddess, robed like Juno, her hands raised in blessing over crowds that do not cheer. In private, she belongs to him in ways that cross every Roman boundary, of family, of state, of religion. No law binds her, and no law protects her. Some days he is tender. He praises her beauty, gives her rare jewels, orders statues carved in her likeness. Other days he is cruel. He mocks her lineage, reminds her that she is still his subject, not his equal. He demands that she attend to him like a servant, then insists she dine at his side as his queen. Whispers grow louder beyond the palace gates. Senators pass notes in silence. Citizens avert their eyes when the couple appears. Children ask questions their parents refuse to answer. No one knows what she truly thinks. Agrippina keeps her face calm, her words few, her thoughts hidden beneath layers of practiced composure. But inside she calculates. She has learned what power looks like, how it behaves, and where it begins to crack. She knows Caligula is feared, not loved. That fear breeds enemies, that enemies make plans. So she waits, listening more than speaking, watching every move with the eyes of someone who has already survived too much to trust in safety. She is no longer just a sister, no longer only a wife. She is now something else entirely, an unwilling partner in an emperor's madness, trapped in a palace that calls her divine, and a role from which escape may never come. At first, Rome held its tongue. The city had seen strange emperors before. Madness was not new, but what Caligula had done, marrying his own sister, placing her beside him as a goddess, was something else entirely. It wasn't just a scandal, it was sacrilege. In the Senate, the reaction was cold silence. Senators avoided eye contact when her name was spoken. No one dared question the emperor outright, but behind closed doors, papers were burned, wills were changed, alliances dissolved. No one wanted to be caught praising a regime so visibly decaying. Every gesture of loyalty now came with risk. Would Caligula see praise as obedience, or mock it as weakness? The priesthood faced its own crisis. Some refused to bless the union, citing tradition and law. Those men disappeared. Others rewrote old rituals to justify the marriage, invoking obscure myths and divine precedents. They compared Agrippina to Juno, to Isis, to forgotten goddesses who had once married their brothers. But even these comparisons rang hollow. Rome knew the difference between myth and madness. Among the people, outrage simmered beneath a layer of fear. Market stalls buzzed with quiet gossip. Some called it a curse, claiming the gods had turned their backs on the empire. Others believed it was punishment for years of decadence and war. The coins bearing Agrippina's face were spat on by some and hoarded by others, knowing history might soon erase her entirely. Foreign dignitaries wrote cautiously to their courts. A king from the east refused to send his daughter as a bride, citing uncertainties in Rome's leadership. Ambassadors from Gaul and Spain shortened their stays. Even in distant provinces, word spread of an emperor who had forsaken Roman values. But no one moved against him. Not yet. He was still emperor, still divine. And he held the legions, the treasury, and the law in his clenched fist. The people of Rome watched, waited, and whispered. They could not yet see the fall, but they had already stopped believing in the future. The marriage had not just shocked the empire, it had fractured it, turning fear into silence and silence into something more dangerous, hatred. By the third year of Caligula's reign, the laughter had stopped. His public spectacles were no longer entertained, they unsettled. His divine proclamations no longer amused, they were offended. Senators bowed, but their eyes were cold. Generals saluted, but they tightened their grips on their swords. And inside the palace, among the marble corridors and silk-draped chambers, people began to whisper endings. The plot did not begin with fire and fury. It began with exhaustion. Caligula had emptied the treasury, humiliated the Senate, mocked the gods, and now flaunted his incestuous marriage as divine truth. Rome could no longer pretend this was eccentricity. It was madness. And madness at the head of an empire was a threat that could not be ignored. The Praetorian Guard, once his loyal shield, felt the sting of betrayal. Caligula had reduced their bonuses, insulted their officers, and even publicly mocked their discipline. Cassius Chaerea, a decorated tribune, had become the target of Caligula's sharpest ridicule. The emperor called him names meant to provoke, questioned his manhood, and laughed when others joined in. What Caligula saw as entertainment, Chaerea took as humiliation. And humiliation, in Rome, was a dangerous thing. Behind closed doors, Chaerea began to meet with senators who had once feared Caligula, but now feared something worse, his survival. They didn't speak in long speeches or make grand declarations, they simply agreed. The emperor had to die. Agrippina's role in the plot remains a mystery. Some say she knew everything, kept silent, and waited for her brother's fall. Others believe she was left out entirely, still trapped in the role of sister wife, watched too closely to move. A few claim she sent signals to the conspirators, subtle nods passed behind closed doors, a warning blink through a veil. There is no proof, only shadows. What is certain is that the conspirators acted with precision. They chose a public festival when Caligula would be exposed, surrounded not by soldiers, but by actors, dancers, and sycophants. They chose speed over spectacle, knives over speeches. They understood what Rome had come to need. Not a trial, not a reckoning, just an end. And so, in the very palace where Caligula had crowned himself a god and married his sister, the ground was being laid for blood to reclaim what madness had taken. It began with applause. Caligula had just finished a performance inside the palace theatre, a play he had written, directed, and starred in. He took the stage dressed as a god, arms outstretched, waiting for the praise he believed was eternal. The clapping was polite, but thin. Even his courtiers were growing tired. Behind the curtains, in the corridors between the throne room and the barracks, steel was being drawn. Cassius Chaerea waited near a narrow passage where the emperor often walked alone between appearances. He held a dagger beneath his robe, his breath steady. The others were in position. They would strike together. There would be no speeches, just silence, and then the sound of a body hitting marble. Caligula entered, smiling. He greeted Chaerea with a jest. One last insult, one final sneer. Then Chaerea moved. The dagger plunged into Caligula's side. The emperor staggered back, eyes wide with disbelief, blood soaking his robes. He screamed, not like a god, but like a man. The others closed in. One after another, the blades found their mark. Chest, stomach, back. No ceremony, no mercy. They stabbed until the white marble floor turned red. When it was done, Caligula's body lay twisted, arms sprawled, crown rolling across the tiles. The silence that followed was total. For a moment, no one knew what would come next. Then chaos erupted. Guards ran in every direction. Servants screamed. In the confusion, conspirators rushed to secure the exits. They had killed the emperor, but not yet claimed the empire. In a nearby room, Agrippina waited. Some say she was protected, others say she was hiding. She had once stood beside the man they had just butchered, called his sister, his wife, his equal. Now she was alone. The Senate met in panic, unsure whether to restore the Republic or choose a new emperor. The Praetorians acted faster. They found Claudius, Caligula's uncle, trembling behind a curtain, dragged him to the camp and declared him emperor by nightfall. By morning, Caligula's body was gone, burned, buried in secret. No tomb, no monument, no divine honours. The man who had crowned himself a living god died like a criminal, forgotten by law, remembered only in whispers. Rome exhaled. The nightmare had ended, but the scars he left, on the city, on its people, and on his own blood would not fade. The palace was quiet. Curtains were drawn, halls scrubbed clean, statues of Caligula removed overnight. His name vanished from public records. The Senate passed decrees erasing his titles, his laws, and even his memory. Rome wanted to forget, but the damage could not be undone. The empire had seen blood before, but never like this. Never an emperor who called himself a god, married his sister, and ruled by whim. The city walked lightly now, unsure where madness ended and order began. Fear lingered in every marble corridor. No one could say how deep the infection had gone. Claudius, once mocked for his limp and stutter, now sat on the throne. The same man who had survived by hiding behind books and staying silent. He promised restoration, stability, reason. But he ruled with the knowledge that emperors were not just overthrown, they were butchered. Agrippina survived, for now. Her role in the plot was never proven, her status never fully restored. But she had learned the most important lesson of all. Power was not given. It was taken, shaped, and held by those willing to wait, to watch, and to endure. She disappeared from public life briefly, her name spoken less, her movements quiet. But she was not finished. Her time would come. The people of Rome returned to their markets. The temples reopened. The games resumed. But behind every public cheer was a private silence. They had seen what happened when power broke free of tradition, when family meant nothing, and the gods were made to kneel. Caligula was dead. His body burned, his memory condemned. But the world he left behind was still healing, still watching, still wary. Rome had survived the storm. Now it would try to rebuild, brick by brick, law by law, beneath the long shadow of a crown that had once sat on the head of a madman.